don't dive in head first, which sounds weird, but I'm going to explain what that means. So like, I think a lot of people will say like, quit your job and then find out what you're going to do. I wouldn't do that. I would learn on the side, spend the time while you have the stable W-2 income. Mm-hmm. And even before that, really think like, do you want to leave your job? Because, there's really good things about jobs. Jobs are very good to have. It's not like this thing that should be avoided at all costs. And you can absolutely do real estate on the side, especially if you're hiring out property managers. So I guess the piece of advice would be to learn as much as you can about it while you have your job, start investing while you have your job, and don't leave your job until you are very, very clear on your actual cash flow coming in on a regular basis.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I'm your host, Yona Weiss. As always, here today with another awesome guest. We have Jeff Albaum. I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
It's my pleasure. I love chatting with real estate investors of all shapes and sizes. And, you and I met at a conference last year in Charlotte. Excited actually to be going back there this year. And, just hit it off. I think it was a great conversation. We had a lot in common. And then here we are, almost a year later, and just continue to keep pushing the needle, continue to keep moving things. So for our listeners who don't know who Jeff is, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction, who you are, what your background is, and how you got started in real estate?
For sure. So I studied engineering in undergrad, was working as an engineer, and that was going to be my path. And I think like a lot of people stumbled upon this purple book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, had my mind totally blown. Was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. So was working as an engineer for a couple of years and just investing in real estate on the side and all out of state. I grew up in California, was buying property in the Midwest because California was too expensive, and slowly just built that up. So started buying out of state properties slowly but surely, and just the old school, like save up for a down payment, put a down payment, then start over.
Right.
Nothing crazy. Ended up partnering with a good friend of mine from college. We partnered up to start buying buildings together. And we then wouldn't shut up about what we were doing. So we had some friends and family come to us and ask to invest with us, which was a very weird topic and a weird thing that we weren't expecting to happen. So we set up a fund for unaccredited investors and then got into the short-term rental space. And then from there, set up a short-term rental property management company, which leads us to today. So that's the 10,000 foot overview.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. I mean, first of all, there's a lot to unpack. Just in the short, brief, introduction that you gave there. I mean, the engineering side of things, I've found a lot of engineers who then turn into real estate investors. And I'm wondering, what is that? I think the ability to have, Excel being a friend of yours is a huge, it's a great skill to have. I think a lot of people underestimate the power of Excel when doing real estate deals. I personally still am not great with Excel, but have partners that are underwriters and that do enjoy that side of things. But having that, I think, gives you an advantage over other people, which may or may not have something to do with why, you find engineers going into real estate.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think also, pragmatically speaking, when you study engineering, you do a lot of hard math and then you think that that's the only thing you can do. And then you look into real estate, and real estate is just hard math still, but it's not calculus. It's addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, whatever. And so you can go from, oh, wow, I can do easier math and make more money. Like that's for sure. Why wouldn't I do that?
Right. And I think, like you said, the paradigm shift of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a lot of people don't even know stuff like that existed before reading that book, knowing about financial education. I know I didn't have any of that growing up, learning about real estate investing for sure. And just, how the systems work and how to use the systems for our benefit. And that's huge. That's huge. But what struck me most in what you mentioned a few minutes ago is how you had investors, friends and family come to you first before, I think a lot of people approach that in the exact opposite way. Is they're trying to figure out, how can I get more money to invest? Let's try to find investors.
Right. Yeah. I mean, truth be told, it was something that I had never considered. I had heard of these people who would raise money, and I was like, that, maybe down the line. But yeah, it just kind of happened fairly organically. And, you know, our fund is fairly small. It's nothing huge, but it's people that we know very well. And throughout that process, you kind of start learning about how to talk to investors and slowly bringing on people who aren't, in your inner circle. And it was a really, really cool learning opportunity for sure.
And has it grown? I mean, since you guys started that, has it expanded to then reaching out to, not necessarily friends and family?
Yeah. So we have a couple limited partners. So investors who we met organically, kind of just networking at conferences in the general vicinity and just kind of being around, that was a really cool moment when that happened. Cause it was like, whoa, that all of a sudden it kind of expands your horizon, so to speak.
It does. Now, let's talk about the name of your company, because I love how names have meaning. And we've talked about this many times on the podcast before, but the name of your company is Big Moment Capital. So what was that big moment for you? Or is there some big moment in the future that we're talking? Where does the name come from?
Yeah. So the whole ethos of the company was based on the fact of it's super, super, super important. So me and my partner, his name's Ian. So we've been best friends. We met in college and we've been best friends since, basically. He's also Southern California native. And when we started the company together, our whole thing was we wanted to be there for everyone's big moments. Like in our friend group from college, we have a very tight friend group. And anytime someone has a big life event, a big something, like a big moment, we want to be there.
Wow.
And the freedom to go and do that comes from obviously financial freedom through real estate. So the whole idea of the company was like, we want to be there for each other's, for other people's, for our big moments.
That's awesome.
And then it kind of grew into, we want our investors to be able to be there for their big moments. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. It really, like you said, shows what the underlying why, which a lot of people struggle how to define that. And I think you've really kind of summed it up in that, in just the name of the company. So that's awesome. You can do that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very cool. So you mentioned short-term rentals. I'm fascinated by this. We've talked about it a lot on the podcast. I know you've done multifamily also. You've done some other stuff as well in terms of real estate investing. Where do you have do you have a core? Is there one thing you're focused on more than others? Or, what's the kind of the spread of your investing portfolio, if you will?
For sure. Yeah. So the majority of doors in the portfolio is small multifamily. So all under 5 units. Anywhere from single family up to four units. So the majority of doors are small multifamily. The majority of revenue comes from short-term rentals, which are all single family. So it's kind of it's not exactly even on the pie chart. But we have both, basically. It's about probably half and half.
Okay. And going forward, is it like an acquisition strategy? I know you did start out by buying those smaller properties first and then kind of transitioned more into the short-term rental, but it seemed like kind of the buy and hold type thing, like hold out, for as long as you can.
Yeah. I've never really liked the idea of flipping. Like we have done flips. I don't know. I feel like every flipper or wholesaler you talk to who's been doing it for more than 10 years has always kind of given you the same advice. Like, I wish I had never sold. I wish, sure, you can get a quick, a big check, or you can wait and kind of delay that gratification and then get a much bigger growth in net worth. So to me, I would rather delay the gratification for as long as possible, hold on to everything. And then that also kind of changes the criteria of how you operate the building, right? Because if you're looking at something like, hey, I'm going to sell this in 2 years, you might operate it differently than if you say, hey, I'm going to own this for life, right? And I love the idea of owning it for life and just investing in making it as good of a building as it possibly can be, because we're going to own it for life.
Yeah. And I'm sure the quality of tenants is a big factor in that. Good people stay there long-term is, obviously going to help the quality of the neighborhood, the quality of the buildings itself. For sure. Very cool. So short-term rentals has been the new, kind of the big thing over the past couple of years, right? But there's been a lot of, most recently in the past few months, a lot of pushback and people saying, oh, Airbnbs are overrated. Too many people got into the space and too many investors came in with capital. And now it's kind of stale to some extent or another. Are you seeing that in the markets that you invest in? Maybe just to back up, which markets do you invest in? And if you can share a little on that.
Yeah, for sure. So we are like the epitome of the people you just said. We went into the Great Smoky Mountains in 2021. So like everyone and their mother who was doing that too. So for sure, I think there's two sides to that coin, right? So it's interesting to look at when you're looking at a real estate deal and you're looking at it over time, right? Take a multifamily property. You can kind of project rent growths to increase, right? So you can see, okay, if the deal doesn't make sense in year one, that's okay because we're underwriting for year 3 on, right? Like we know we're going to operate at, it's going to be a thinner margin. And then starting in year 3, it's going to really get going. And that's where kind of the, up and to the right, right? With short-term rentals, you don't really have that same data of how much rent grows because it's such a new industry, right? Like you can't look and see like, oh, rents have been going up since the 1970s. Maybe you just don't know. So I think if you couple the unknown future rents with the doubling of interest rates, it creates the market that we're in now, right? Like you can't have properties be priced the same way that they were a year ago when your payments have doubled and your future rent is uncertain. Like that, who would buy that?
Right. It makes the underwriting extremely difficult.
Yes. So like we haven't bought anything really in the short-term rental space since almost a year ago because of that. No deals are penciling out for us.
But you're still able to manage, and create revenue through the properties you currently own, correct?
Correct.
And have you seen a lessening of influx of travelers? You mentioned you own the Smoky Mountains. That's that is a short-term vacation rental haven. We're not talking about an area where you may have travelers for other reasons, visiting and renting out short-term leases. We're talking about specifically tourism.
Right. Yeah, we haven't felt the slowdown that I think a lot of people have felt. January, February, March are always the slowest times in this market anyways. So like for sure it's slower now, but Christmas and New Year's was rocking and rolling. Thanksgiving, rocking and rolling. So I think I'll have a better understanding of the real picture come mid-March to early April. But yeah, as of now, we have not felt that large slowdown of people traveling.
Mm-hmm. And you manage other people's properties as well, or only your own properties?
So as of now, only our own. We set up a different entity to basically hire ourselves. And we did that because a lot of short-term rental management companies are really expensive.
Yes.
And so even if you're bringing in a lot of revenue, you're paying out a lot of management fees. And I am with long-term rentals. I think there's a special place in heaven for property managers because they are doing so much work and they are, they're busting their backs to get everything taken care of. And in the short-term space, it's a lot of coordination, right? So like the management companies that I was talking to, because I had a management company that I had hired out prior to starting ours. And I was really struggling to understand, like they were outsourcing the cleaning.
Right.
They were outsourcing the maintenance.
Right.
They were probably using a software to coordinate everything. So I was like, what are you, there was a disconnect for me. So I was like, okay, what if we started our own company? We'll do the management, we'll hire ourselves and we'll charge ourselves a lower fee than the manager, like the third party managers were charging us. So that way our investors can net that difference.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we keep the gross revenue the same or better, our investors win. We win because it's another income stream for us. And it's a win-win situation. So that's what we did about a year ago, last January of 2022. And that's been a huge learning process too, kind of getting systems set up into place. And my partner's so good at, I'll be in my head about like, oh, I got to respond to this, da, da, da. He's like, how can you make sure you never do that again? I'm like, that's a great question. That's a great question. So they're trying to build systems to get me out of the equation and get people talking to each other. It's been really, really fun.
Absolutely. And in doing that, are you building systems in terms of automations, or is it more, just the processes that allow for communication to be easier?
Both. So the processes for sure. And truth be told, with software these days, it's really easy. There's, 3 big companies that, have software for basically the price of Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
It's very affordable. And, if you're going to be managing, under 10 listings, it's great. It does everything you need it to do.
That's awesome.
And then with automations, it's for sure. We do have a maintenance person that we brought on, and we have a guest messaging experience coordinator that we brought on. And so getting, them to talk to each other without me is huge. And I struggle with that to this day. I am not at the point where it's like, yep, I can just sit back because I care too much. I think that's something I'm working on.
100%. I found that it is, like you said, there's a lot of softwares out there that can manage the different processes, the different communications, the hiring and really the bookings and all that kind of stuff. But I saw somewhere recently, and I'm struggling to remember where I saw it, but literally a tech stack of I think it was 8 different categories of different types of softwares needed or running hospitality, Airbnb. And in each of those categories, there was like, a half a dozen to a dozen different softwares, and it's
Yeah.
like, once you start building something like that, I mean, as an engineer, I'm sure that this is where you kind of excel and are able to kind of integrate different systems to, just increase that process, transparency.
I mean, yes, but also the other side of that coin is like, I think as an engineer, I don't know if this makes me a good engineer or not good engineer, but I don't like a lot of different things. I like simple, right? The simpler, the better. So like when there's so many, this software has to talk to this software to talk to this software, it makes my brain hurt. So I'm like, okay, let's just do the easiest, simplest, most like A to B. However we can get there the fastest, let's do that. So our tech stack is we have tech, but it's not anything crazy. And that was always I was at a short-term rental conference in Austin, actually a couple months ago. And everyone was, what's your tech stack? What's your tech stack? Like, I don't know what that means. What question are you asking? Like, what softwares do we use? Okay, here you go. That was a term I learned.
Oh yeah. I got like, Google Sheets and,
Right. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Microsoft Word?
Yeah, right.
Does that count? Gmail? Is that a tech stack?
Yeah, that's part of it. I guess so. Everyone has their different processes, that makes sense for them. So, I mean, what do you see going forward for Big Moment Capital for you and your partner? I mean, you said you haven't bought anything recently in terms of the short-term rentals. If you have like some goals for the next few years, can you share any of those with us?
Yeah, for sure. So as of now, we finished deploying all the capital that we raised at the end of last year. And that was into long-term rentals in the Midwest, which is kind of how we got started, our bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're kind of at this interesting point where like, okay, like we're not raising again. We finished raising, we finished deploying. Now we have, cash in the bank. We have kind of a couple projects ongoing to fix things up. And then we have our own portfolio outside of the fund that, we're working on, we're managing, we're doing the asset management of. And then the third bucket is the management company. So working on making that more efficient, growing and scaling that if we want to. But the goals are kind of the same as they've always been, and this sounds corny, so I apologize in advance, but the goals are really to have the freedom to go to stuff that we want to do, to be there for each other's big moments, for our big moments. So to not be bogged down day to day with like work,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like, yeah, go for it.
It is cliche, but it's awesome. I mean, that's really what it's all about. You have some people that are kind of in it and they're trying to grow this, $100 million company and things like that. And I think you guys just have your priorities in a different place. It's like, yeah, we just want to live our best lives and, enjoy company with people we like and not work, as much, more than we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of it like being a passive investment. I was chatting with someone the other day, I think it was my brother or it might've been Ian, but we were talking about like, okay, would you rather have, 1,000 doors that you're an LP of, or you're an op, or you're a GP of, or whatever it is, you own 1,000 doors, or like 5 single family homes that you own in full? And talk about like paradigm shifts. My mind was blown. I was like, wow, that's interesting. I never thought about that because going back to like I like simple, 5 single family homes is a lot simpler than 1,000 doors. And then you talk about like, well, what about, your ROI is so low. And I was like, yeah, that's okay.
But if it's covering expenses, really that's the goal. Like it doesn't take a lot to create cash flow that can cover your living expenses. It really doesn't.
Right.
I mean, and like you said, 5 single families may be enough. I mean, everyone's lifestyle, may be a little bit different. It depends if you have a big family, kids, et cetera. There's, expenses are higher, but it's true. Just a few properties can literally do that for you.
Right. And with no mortgage is a big component of that. Right.
Sure.
So yeah, that's been something I've been thinking about more in the recent months.
And you mentioned earlier that the revenue from your short-term rentals are higher than, obviously the long-term rentals. And we've talked about that a lot on the show. That's, clear. How much more? I'm just curious. I mean, if you have like rough numbers, I'm not looking for like exact breakdown, but is it like 2x, 3x, 10x?
Oh, probably 3. Yeah. Well, let's see. This is a bad comparison because it's hard to compare apples to apples,
right?
Or it's hard to compare apples to oranges, right? So one is like a single family home. It's a nice cabin in the woods. It's really pretty and a really nice area. The other is a more of like a class B minus, class C plus single family home in a suburban city. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to compare. So yes, they're both single family homes,
right?
But I feel like to compare those revenues that's kind of clickbaity,
I hear that.
So it's hard. Probably 4x in terms of revenue if I had to guess, on average, maybe 5, but your expenses are also much higher,
Sure.
right? So that's the thing that is, it doesn't exactly correspond to your cash flow. So your cash flow isn't necessarily 4x. Your cash flow is probably 2.5x.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's still
when
amazing.
all is said and done. Oh, it's great. It's great.
I'm wondering why, you think it's because of the management and because of the actual just processes of managing a short-term rental that more people don't do that. I mean, it seems like, even though, yes, we talked about earlier how so many people got in and so many people were running to get into this investment class, probably partially because of, the ability to create more revenue. But at the same time, there's really more work involved than just, owning a single family.
For sure. If you outsource the property management, it's the same thing. It's a very passive investment. There's not a lot of work to be done because that property manager is taken care of. The thing is, it's just so tough to find a deal. Like if a property manager is charging you, I know property managers that charge 30%
Right.
of the gross revenue. So it just doesn't make sense to me where you can show me a deal that looks good on paper to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and then take 30% off that and it still looks good. It doesn't make sense to me. So I think, and there's so much, like we've talked about, there's so much technology. You can build your own tech stack for very, in a very affordable price. I think a lot of people can do this themselves. They don't really need a property management company to do it for them. I think you run into the classic, examples of people who are literally too busy and they're really good at making money somewhere else. So it just doesn't make sense for them to spend the time to learn to invest their time.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a good reason to go with the property manager. Or if you really, really, really just don't want to, I think that's another good reason. Because it does take time. It's a definitely more active process than hiring a manager for a long-term.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. I mean, the self-managing has its own benefits. I mean, like we talked about many times in the show about the tax benefits that come involved, with the self-managing of short-term rentals. You have the material participation, which allows you to, use those passive losses to offset your active income, W-2 income. So that's a huge benefit that short-term rentals have over long-term rentals, which is why I see a lot of people self-managing. However, like you said, it does take a lot more time, especially, just setting things up takes a lot of time. Hopefully you can manage it. Once things are set up, it becomes a lot more manageable because if done correctly, the software and the communications, everything, a lot of that, the communication is kind of automated.
Yeah, 100%.
What advice, we do call this Weiss advice. So, Jeff, what advice would you give to, someone who is currently an engineer or currently working a W-2 and, thinking, maybe there's a future for me in real estate?
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice would be to don't dive in head first, which sounds weird, but I'm going to explain what that means. So I think a lot of people will say quit your job and then find out what you're going to do. I wouldn't do that. I would learn on the side, spend the time while you have the stable W-2 income. Mm-hmm. And even before that, really think do you want to leave your job? Because, there's really good things about jobs. Jobs are very good to have. It's not like this thing that should be avoided at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And you can absolutely do real estate on the side, especially if you're hiring out property managers. So I guess the piece of advice would be to learn as much as you can about it while you have your job, start investing while you have your job, and don't leave your job until you are very, very clear on your actual cash flow coming in on a regular basis. Because it can be easy to see 1 month of good rents come in, great, I'm quitting, I'm leaving, I'm out. And then the next month comes, and you're they got to fix the HVAC.
Right. Yeah. And those unexpected expenses can be huge sometimes, especially with single families. But that's excellent advice. Not everyone is built to be an entrepreneur.
Yep.
It's just not in everyone's blood. I think you're absolutely right about the advantages of having a job. Having you'll oftentimes be able to get a bank loan much easier than, if you don't have a W-2, may have insurance and, all kinds of other things, health plans, that retirement accounts and things like that actually can be to your advantage. And so, you can definitely do both simultaneously. I'm curious how long, from when you invested in your first rental to then moving on and quitting your full-time job?
It was about 2.5 years or maybe 3 years. But, the biggest part of that was I was single at the time. I was living very much below my means. So I was able to save, and I was living in an expensive area. So that corresponded to a higher income. So the higher income with the living below your means equates to a large amount of a high savings rate.
Right.
That I was able to kind of snowball into out-of-state deals. And I think the savings rate is such an important metric that no one, I feel like, is talked about less. It's all about income. but how much of that income do you keep? And that's where I feel like you're preaching that left, right, and center.
Sure. Yeah. And I saw someone earlier today, actually, I think, or yesterday, last night, post something on one of the channels about, $100,000, for example, is a very high income if your expenses are only 40,000. But, if your expenses are 100,000, then, 100,000 is very low income if your expenses are 120,000, right? So, obviously
Right.
your expense rate and how much you can save is such a huge factor because again, the savings that you have, not just for savings, it's, to be able to invest that, and that money grows on its own because it's working simultaneously, that it works on its own. Rich Dad talks about it all the time, or having these assets that work for you and create more cash flow that with that you can, reinvest or buy more, liabilities through those.
Yeah. Right. Have your assets pay for your liabilities.
Exactly. Amazing. Well, Jeff, I want to transition now what we call the final four. These are 4 questions I ask all my guests. First question to you is, what is the worst job that you ever had?
Okay. I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So it was on paper, it was the worst, but in real life, it was the best. So I worked at a bakery in Canada. So I used to live in Canada for a year. So I worked at a bakery, and at the time I was like 15, and I was also working at a butcher shop. And then this bakery called me and asked if I could come work for them. And I was like, man, this is like, cause in Canada you could work when you're 15, and it was awesome. And I walked into the bakery, and I loved the smell of the bakery in the front of the bakery, but I was working in the back of the bakery. And the back of the bakery smells a lot different than the front of the bakery because it's like before you bake the bread, and I didn't know that. So I thought I was just like in heaven. And then I walk in and like, all right, this is where you're going to be working. And I walk in and it smells not good. It's like kind of damp, and I don't know if that's how all bakeries are, but I was like, I got to get out of here. So I worked, the introductory shift, and then I went back to the butcher shop and I asked my boss for more hours.
Wow. Yeah. Exactly. Like you said, the front always is appealing to the customer, but we don't always know. And this is really a lesson in life. We don't always know what goes on behind the scenes and what it really takes to get that final product.
Right.
So kudos to the people that are sacrificing to make that happen, because that's
absolutely.
That's a hard one. Second question, what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
It's called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. So it has nothing to do with business. It's all about life. But reading that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a paradigm shift in terms of like how I thought about financial literacy.
Right.
Can't Hurt Me was a paradigm shift for how I thought about life. Like, have you read it?
I have. Story? And we've discussed it on the show a couple of times also. It's just incredible book.
And just hearing what that human is able to do, it just is such an inspiration. And like, I don't want to be anything like him, because that sounds awful, but just to know that exists is so cool. It's so cool. So anytime I'm like, this is too hard or whatever, I just, no, sir.
Yeah. We have no idea what, the human can accomplish until we push our limits. And I think that's just a huge book on teaching you that lesson. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check that out. A second, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We got a new book out called Never Finished. It's kind of a follow-up to Can't Hurt Me.
Okay. We'll have to check that out too. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, third question for you is, what is a skill or talent that you would like to learn? And this could be anything.
I've always been so fascinated by people who are able to pick up languages. Mm-hmm. Some people have an ear for language. They can listen to something and then kind of get it with the accent and everything. I would love to learn how to acquire that skill, because I can hardly speak English, but I would love to be able to go to a different country and learn and get an ear for that. So if you have any tips or tricks for how to do that, I'd really appreciate it.
We probably should have like a primer course set up at this point, because this is the most common answer I think given on the show to this question is to learn another language. And, one of the things it's amazing. One of the things that I've seen is definitely immersing yourself. That's a given, just immersing yourself in a different language, like going to a place where you're forced to speak that and learning that way. So, if you have the ability, which sounds like you do, have a little more time freedom, but to, just go for, 3 to 6 months or something to some place to pick up a language, I think that would be the way to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Not that I'm speaking from so much experience. I do speak 3 languages fluently, but
which 3?
English, hopefully, and and Yiddish and Hebrew.
Okay.
So, I mean, the thing is, Hebrew and Yiddish are very similar, and English and Yiddish are also very similar in a lot of ways because Yiddish is a Germanic language, which English is also. So there's a lot of overlap between the three, but yeah, and I took Spanish in high school, but I forgot most of that. Once I started learning the other languages and speaking them more fluently. So like anytime like I go to speak Spanish now, like a different language comes out. It's just like your brain, but if I would immerse myself in that, I'd probably pick it up, because I do remember a lot of words. I just don't know how to formulate thoughts well anymore.
Right. Do you find that you'll dream in those other languages?
Not necessarily dream, I don't necessarily remember dreams so well, but definitely thinking. I mean, the paradigm comes when you start thinking in another language. And that to me I had a friend in high school that, was Israeli and she spoke fluent Hebrew also at home, was totally American. And to me, that was a paradigm to me when I started learning Hebrew. And then she told me that it was like, you have to think in the language. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like think in a different language? Like it didn't make sense to me because, when you're just speaking one language, you can't even think of, once you make that shift and you start thinking in the other language, that's when you know that you have it.
It's so cool. That's so cool. All right. Well, that's the new goal to get to.
There you go. All right. Well, fourth and final question, Jeff. What does success mean to you?
That's a great one. I think it's a balance. It's kind of a duopoly. So I think part of me says that success looks like you wake up and you don't have anything you need to do that day. But I'm going to balance that because I think that's good for like a week and then you get bored and there's no purpose. You don't have like a why for what you're doing. You're not contributing at all. You're just existing. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be okay for some people. I don't know if I'd want that forever. So I'd want that for like maybe a week. And then the next week, things that you're doing that you're choosing to do with your time. So if that's volunteering, if that's working at a nonprofit, if that's, being super involved in your kids' lives, in your family's lives, in your friends' lives, I think you do have to incorporate that like acts of service because I do think that is one of the most fulfilling things you can do.
Sure.
So I think success would be day to day doing things that, fill you up.
Yeah, I love that. And, I totally agree. I think we do have really an obligation, and we're here in this world for a reason. We're not just here to kind of suck up resources, and subsist. We're here to really contribute. And like you said, making a difference every single day is really what it's about. Obviously, having the freedom to not necessarily have to do anything. I mean, I think that's huge. And creating that for yourself is really, proponent of that success. But then really coming to the realization of, what you can accomplish once you have that freedom in terms of the giving back and contributing. I think that's awesome. So love that answer, Jeff. Finally, where can our listeners find you or reach out to you if they want to?
Best spot would be either LinkedIn or can I give an email?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's Jeff, Jeff at bigmomentcapital.com.
All right. Well, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would love to be a resource. I can help out anyone in any way that I can. Yona, can I ask you a piece of advice?
Let's do it. Yeah.
So you're a father, right? You have kids?
I have kids. 6 kids. Yeah. Thank God.
So how do you think about, and obviously you're in the real estate world, so there's a financial component that you're part of. How do you think about balancing striving for a comfortable financial position while also raising kids in a balanced, down to earth way? How do you think about that?
Such a huge question. We'd have to spend a whole episode on really breaking this down. But, I guess on the fly, the Reader's Digest version is the first step. You have to realize, what it is that you want in life and what life is really about. I mean, coming to have some sort of passion or about what we're here in this world for, and then being able to give that over to your children and teaching them, because they're not necessarily going to get all of that in school. Just like we didn't get financial education in school, we also probably didn't get too much, spirituality in school or just what's the meaning of life and these kind of things in school. And so a lot of those things are given over, not necessarily, in a formal education type way, but just in living as an example and, spending time and just sharing those experiences with kids. They pick a lot up. So, I mean, that's really the first step. Having like you said earlier, just having the financial freedom or an ability to be able to spend more time and then more quality time and share those life experiences allows for that to kind of happen more organically and more naturally. But, for people who are just living and working and, hoping that the schools raise their kids for them and, et cetera, unfortunately, it's it happens too much in society, but you have to take a proactive role. So, I mean, it's not a balance as much as it is just being proactive and, and sharing those experiences.
Gotcha. Man, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure, Jeff. I appreciate you coming on the show and spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Yona. This is really fun.
Oh, awesome. And to our listeners, thank you guys for joining all the way until the end once again. And remember, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.